Jocelyn.
And I'm Danny.
And this is Why Can't We Talk About It? How have you been, Danny?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
I've been pretty good. I've had a pretty chill week. I actually wanted to start off this episode with a recommendation.
Nice.
I've been reading a really good book. It's actually what I've been spending the majority of my week doing. And it's been a really long time since, I have a book that I can't put down and I'm spending all my free time on it. So I thought it's worth mentioning. It's called The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's a fantasy book. It's the first of a trilogy, I believe, and I'm a huge fantasy nerd. I love fantasy. I grew up reading fantasy books, but most of my fantasy books were like white people in medieval times, fairies kind of fantasy. And this book is so cool. It's set in like an alternate 18th century Egypt. And the magic is, it's like jinns and has a lot of Middle Eastern culture woven in. And it's just so beautiful. And the descriptions are so vivid. It's been a long time since I've been sucked into a fantasy book again, like a really cool world building book. And this is it. This is so great. So I've been spending all my free time on it, and I just started it a few days ago, and I am like 80% through the book, and I'm just excited that I have 2 more to go. So that's what I'm going to be spending the next few weeks on.
You got through 80% of the book in a few days?
Yeah. I'm a big reader. When I find a book. I used to read a lot. I was a huge nerd when I was a kid. When we were young, we moved around a lot, and there was a 2-year period where we didn't have TV. So all I could do was read. I was living in France, so we didn't have TV. So I was like 10 to 13-ish, those like very formative years. So all I did was read books. I remember distinctly when I moved back home, I had no idea who like Snoop Dogg was, and I got made fun of a lot. So At the time, I was like really upset with my parents for keeping me sheltered from pop culture. But now I'm glad because it made me a big reader.
Yeah, I think, when we were working together, I feel like, weren't you doing some kind of like books per year goal? Was it like 50, I want to say?
I still do a books
right?
per year goal. Yeah. This year I hit 35. My goal was 30 and I'm at 35.
Oh.
So we're good.
You're
we're
way
good.
past that goal.
I blew past it. The past couple of years, when we worked together, it was 50. And then when I got my new job and had trouble setting boundaries, I wasn't reaching my goal the next year or the year after. So I lowered it, but I've since reprioritized what's important in my life. And so I have made a lot more time for reading.
And are they typically fiction or nonfiction?
More often than not, it's fiction. I'm not a huge nonfiction reader. I do like self-help books.
Right.
I know we both do. Self-help books are great. But besides that, I'm much more of like a getting lost in a different world kind of reader.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's cool. That's fine. I mean, there's no right or wrong there. I think I'm exclusively nonfiction these days. As a child, all fiction, but as an adult, I'm not sure why. Just fiction, like
just nonfiction.
Oh, sorry, nonfiction. Yeah, you're right. Just nonfiction. I think I tried doing a fiction book recently, but I just was like, you know what, this is not real, so never mind. I just couldn't get into it.
Maybe you just need the right one. You know what? I actually read another one. It's called Counterfeit. I don't have it in front of me, so let me pull it up so I can give you the author. But Counterfeit was a really good, super fast-paced, snappy, con. It's these two women. I don't want to give it away, but it's about the replica bag market, and has a lot of insight into being Asian in America, which actually is kind of related to what we're going to talk about today. But it was so good. It was so fast-paced and kind of like, not Ocean's 11. That wouldn't be describing it the right way, but it is a con. So I definitely recommend that one. Counterfeit by Kirsten Chen. But yeah, maybe you just need to find the right one. What kind of fiction books did you like when you were young?
Well, I know they had to do with, I think, magic. Like, not like Harry Potter magic, but it was, but I guess it's still kind of like wizards, but like pre-Harry Potter, before that became like a thing. Unfortunately, I don't really remember a lot of the books that I read even back then, but I just know there were a lot of fiction books. Although, one of the memories I can have of who's the Dan Brown author?
Oh, yeah.
He did those, what's that big one?
Isn't it Angels and Demons?
No.
Is that right?
That's one of them.
The Da Vinci Code. The Da Vinci Code. Yeah.
I remember finishing that book over one weekend when I read that book. So that's probably a book where I'm like, oh, I just got so into it. And then it's one of those where like part of me as a kid is like, maybe it's real. And so it was more intriguing because in my mind, I'm like, oh, maybe we don't know that it's not real. It could be real. I don't know. So it was very intriguing. So that's something where I'm like, oh, once I get into it, I know I'm into it. But then, there's some where it'll take me a long time. And I'm like, it's not that great. So these days, I think it's...
Yeah, you need like a fast-paced sort of like something that's going to suck you in to get you back into it.
Yeah, these days it's more of nonfiction because I just want to know what's going on in the world.
Yes, that's good. Speaking of, do you have a recommendation for me?
Well, if we're talking about books, actually, I don't think this one really works for you, but this is one book that I did read just because of my therapy journey. It's one called, I actually just finished this not too long ago. It's called Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. It's by Lindsay C. Gibson. And it's actually, it's something where I think I'm going to kind of talk about this in later episodes, but it does kind of put into perspective a lot in terms of what my perspective of my relationship, I think, with my parents are. In the sense that it doesn't really... Let me see if I can just pull up real quick, because I think the way it kind of talks about the relationships of kids and the parents is this idea that, we kind of have an assumption of how parents are supposed to be towards the children. However, I think the ideal way is where both parties, the relationship, the emotions are involved, and where parents are attuned to the kids. However, if that doesn't work out that way, then there's a lot of things that can kind of not necessarily go wrong, but just go in a way where I guess kids grow up with certain feelings or voids, or in my case, feelings of emptiness that I just didn't understand why that was the case. And this book kind of puts it into a perspective in which I think is more digestible to help me understand why things are the way they are. And so it's something that I think if anyone ever was to be in my shoes or have those kind of feelings, which I think we'll talk about more in depth, again, like I said, in a future episode, I'll probably bring this up again, but it's definitely something that I recommend because it just kind of lays things out in an easy to understand way.
I'm glad to hear that. Did your therapist recommend it?
No, she did not. It was recommended on Reddit. So
Great. The people's free therapy.
yeah, I'm pretty sure I read it on, I think it was a thread about therapy. And so someone I think in there brought it up. And then I saw it a few times. So I was like, okay, enough people have recommended it. Maybe it's time for me to have a read as well. So a lot of things come up through Reddit. It helps me keep the pulse on things.
Can you say the name of the book again one more time?
Yeah, it's called Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents by Lindsay C. Gibson.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that you found it helpful. Maybe some of our listeners will too.
Yeah, hope so. If anyone has read it or maybe they're into it, leave some comments. Maybe we could discuss that one day in the future.
Yeah, leave some comments on our Instagram. Our Instagram handle is at Why Can't We Podcast. So we'd love to have you over there. But today we are going to talk about something really important to us. We're talking about Asian representation, specifically in the media, but just maybe overall how that has affected us. I'm really excited to talk about this because I saw everything everywhere all at once, not recently, but a few months ago. And it had such an impact on me that it just really made me excited to dive deep into this topic because it was the first time seeing a movie with a predominantly Asian cast and not just a conventional, like a stereotype kind of Asian cast, but the actors were portrayed so realistically. Michelle Yeoh was not, she's worlds away from the characters she portrays in Crazy Rich Asians, but she really embodies like the immigrant working in the U.S., like a middle-aged woman. She's not glamorized. Her daughter, oh my gosh, I love her character. The actress's name is not coming to mind at the moment, but I just love her. I love that she doesn't play like a typical Asian stereotype. She's like such a firecracker, kind of like, she doesn't fit conventional beauty standards. She's amazing. The whole thing just was incredible and made me cry, and I love it so much. And it's a movie that I wish I had when I was young. There was nothing like that for me growing up, and I think it's so important, and that's why we wanted to talk about it today. So, Danny, I don't know if you want to start or if you want me to start with, realizing when we were young that we were different, or maybe like how our experience of seeing or not seeing Asian representation in the media has affected us.
Yeah, I can kind of speak onto that. First of all, I have not seen Everything Everywhere All at Once. So,
oh my gosh, I should have led with that in the recos then. If you haven't seen it, you gotta see it. It's so good.
I was kind of waiting to see if you're going to spoil it, and then I'll yell spoiler, but luckily you didn't. But it's too bad because actually I think if I had seen it already, I think we will probably have a discussion about that. There's definitely going to be some movies I think we have seen. Crazy Rich Asians, I think that's one I think I want to go into a bit. But before we get into that, though, yeah, I do want to go into a little bit in terms of representation and just, I know we're talking about media, and at the same time, though, I want to speak to personal experiences, which is the more of, because I'm an immigrant, my family immigrated here from Taiwan. We came to Canada when I was 6. So for me, up until that age, I've only seen Asian people, or more specifically Taiwanese people. And I've had no concept of anything beyond that. But when I came here, I believe my aunt was in a relationship with someone who was white, and I believe he was from Switzerland, so he was like a big dude, like 6 foot something, and I was 6 years old, and my parents like to tell me the story of like, oh, when I first met him, I freaked out because I didn't know who this person was. He was so big, and like it just scared the crap out of me. But of course, once we got friendly, it was fine. However, even I think at that point, I didn't really realize, oh, we're different. I didn't get the sense of, I'm going to use the term othered, I think, for this, until I was in, I actually have one memory of, I think I was grade 1 when I first came to Canada. I was in school. And even though the children, like we all had different backgrounds, I was like, yeah, we're all kids. But I didn't feel that I was different though until there's one day I was sitting beside this boy, and I remember his name's Ian, and he was white, and we're cool. But for lunch, my mom always packed me snacks, and these 2 snacks were these packets of seaweed, the dry seaweed.
Delicious.
Yeah, amazing, so good. And then there's a little packet of, it's like an orange packet cracker. It comes in 2s. It's like a oval shaped. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's like orange color, and even the cracker is kind of slightly orange.
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. I think my apple used to get them from Market Village.
Probably those. They're like, I think like one type. Anyways, so I remember one day I had the seaweed packet on my desk, and my friend Ian, I remember one time we were having lunch, he looks over at it, and he looks at me and goes, ew, what is that? And my response was to just immediately take that packet of snack, put it back into my brown bag, and take out the other one, which is a cracker. And he goes, okay, that's better. I know that. I know what
a
that
dick.
Is. I know, right? And we're 6. I'm like, oh, what an asshole. At 6 years old. But that was the first time where I go, oh, somebody doesn't like he saw what I was eating, which I enjoyed, and then he just was kind of grossed out by it. And I was like, oh, that's already an unfortunate thing. But of course, back then I couldn't really conceptualize articulate what all that meant. And I think it's just something that I just kind of kept to myself. I don't remember really, talking to my parents about it or anything like that. I just kind of kept it in my memory. But that was, I think, the very first time. But then that kind of got pushed away, because then, growing up through like elementary school, or even high school, it wasn't really something that I even thought about anymore. It just became just like, watching TV, cartoons, TV shows where I just watched them, just absorbed it, and never really thinking about how like, oh, maybe I was actually not seeing representation of Asians, especially growing up. And I just wanted to be like everyone that I saw on TV or in the movies, which, when I think about it now, the 90s and the 2000s, really was mostly like white people. And I think that was the standard, or even the ideal of what myself, I think my friends all wanted to be, but never realizing that it's actually a completely different culture, very different lens of watching. But then, I think maybe we'll come back to this one, but I guess I'm kind of curious if yours is as early as mine, in terms of your experiences of feeling or noticing that. Because I think for me, it's like, yes, I said I was 6 when that happened, but I feel like I didn't really notice it again until much later. I think there's a big gap for me. So is yours like that?
No, mine is a lot different. It's so interesting how unique our experiences are, but I come from a mixed background. So my mom is Hakka Chinese. She was born in India and immigrated to Canada when she was 13. And then my dad is Scottish Canadian, or I basically just call him Wonder Bread because we've been like that side of the family's been in Canada for like forever, like for many generations. So 2 totally different cultures. And so growing up, I mean, like when I was really little, I was just kind of aware of like, you know, the existence of people of all different types of backgrounds.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit different to your experience. But I didn't feel more one type of way than another. I just was who I was. But I remember one of my earliest memories of school was basically being told what I could or couldn't be based on my background. So I loved Sailor Moon growing up, as so many of us do. And when we would play Sailor Moon, me and some of the other younger girls, I would always have to be Sailor Mars, which, you know, Sailor Mars is a bad bitch, so I don't have any issues with that. But I always wanted to be Sailor Moon, not because she was blonde and blue-eyed and, you know, whatever, more because she was the main character. And I wanted to be the main character. I didn't want to be the sidekick, which is what Asians in media when we were growing up always were. Basically, we had Mulan and that was it. It was like, you know, I couldn't be the main character unless I was Sailor Moon. Unless I was
Mars.
Yeah, I always had to be the sidekick. I had to be Sailor Mars. Another kind of similar thing was Power Rangers. I always wanted to be the Red Ranger, which that in itself, I was told, no, you can't be that for 2 reasons. Number 1, you're not a boy. And number 2, you're not white. You have to be the Yellow Ranger, which, like, come on. Like, how on the nose do you have to be? I mean, pretty cool that we did actually have Asian representation in Power Rangers, but still, I didn't want to be Yellow Ranger. I wanted to be Red Ranger. But it was just those memories of other kids being like, no, you can't be such and such because of what you look like. That was sort of my first kind of memory of, I'll use the same term as you, Danny, as being othered. And then I think after that, I paid very close attention to that. And growing up, I did realize that in movies, you know, Asians always have to play certain stereotypes. Like they have to be like the nerd, the nerdy comic relief, or the hot best friend, or, you know, it wasn't ever the main character. And seeing shows and movies today, like, you know, Never Have I Ever, for example, on Netflix. We can talk about Crazy Rich Asians. Like, seeing somebody that looks like me playing the main character just makes me feel so seen. I remember walking out of the theater of Crazy Rich Asians, even though I'm not a $1 billion old money Singapore resident, I still felt like I could relate to the movie, like seeing our culture represented. It just gave me goosebumps. It was such a cool experience. I'm
going to rewind a little bit. I'm going to start back up to Sailor Moon. First of all, it's a cartoon, so I feel like it's ridiculous that anyone was giving you a hard time for that. And honestly, to me, Sailor Moon, all her friends, I never really looked at it as. Wait, hold on. Were the people who wouldn't let you be Sailor Moon, did they see Sailor Moon as non-Asian?
Yeah. White girls.
She's just an Asian girl who dyed her hair. Just, I don't understand. Or at least that's what I grew up with. I thought, hey, here's a I believe it's from Japan, Japanese cartoon. I just assumed they're all Japanese. And if they had different hair colors, it's because they dyed their hair.
You did? No, I didn't.
Yeah.
I was told that wasn't the case. So, no, I didn't see it that way. It's so fascinating that you see it that way. I mean, that makes total sense.
That's how I saw it. I was like, well, this cartoon is from Japan. I'm pretty sure they just had Japanese people in the cartoon and they dyed their hair and all that stuff. So that's weird. I mean, it sucks, but a bit weird from my point of view. And then Power Rangers, yeah, it was kind of odd though that, Yellow Ranger was the Asian one and Black Ranger was black. And
like, come on.
Like, come on. And of course the girl was Pink Ranger, but that's a different thing too. Just not only did you have to deal with like being told you can't be a cartoon character based off of your background, then you got a double whammy of like gender for Power Rangers.
Mm-hmm.
That sucks. But you know what? I don't think I was a big fan of Power Rangers too. I wanted to be the Green Ranger.
Okay.
Which I guess no one's really green. I guess you can't really assign some kind of stereotype or ethnicity to green as far as I know. But then again, he became the White Ranger and I want to be that too. So I don't know what that means about me. Anyways, so that's a whole different thing. But coming back up a little bit to, your experiences with being the main character. Yeah, I think it's not like now, the fact that you just named Everything Everywhere All at Once, the fact that, it's mostly Asian cast. When I saw Crazy Rich Asians for the first time, just the hype around it from, friends and the media that, oh, look at this, it's a full cast of Asian people. Mm-hmm. And I'll admit, when I saw it in theaters, it was kind of odd for me to see it because I just never seen that growing up. Like I've never seen that ever since I immigrated to Canada, where I can see like, oh, an entire, movie or show, it's all Asian people. So, and if anything, the fact that the main, I guess the main actors and actresses are also Asian. So there's like, the star is a Asian person, which it's great, but it's weird because, I guess there's a period of time before these kind of movies came out where the only time I saw Asian people on TV or movies, especially men, was if it involved martial arts. Right. And it's like whether you're doing karate, you are doing kung fu, you're a ninja, you're a samurai, you're using some kind of weapon, like you're always the martial arts kicking ass person, which as great as that is, there was never any representation of a regular dude, that's like just, having a good time. It's always someone who either that or super nerdy. I think that's a very big one. Mm-hmm. I think I hated wearing glasses for that reason. Growing up, I wore glasses and I was like, oh, I'll bet you anytime someone looks at me, that's what they see. Right? And it's like, oh, they must see like, oh, here's an Asian person. He wears glasses. I'll bet you he's good at math. Or, oh, how's your driving? Oh, but it's not that great. And, these stereotypes kind of, sometimes they play out in media too, but I think it does bleed into everyday conversations. And I think you kind of get used to it, but it still kind of sucks each time you kind of hear it. But
have you ever heard them? Like, has anybody ever said anything to you, like an Asian stereotype?
I mean, sometimes I don't know if it's malicious, but I mean, I've been asked like, "Hey, are you good with computers?" Like that's kind of a a thing, and I can be, so I guess that kind of works out. But sometimes I'm like, well, are you asking that because of the way I look, or is it because you just think I might actually know how to, do those kind of things? But sometimes it's more like a joking way. It's like if I, can't figure out something math wise, someone will joke like, "Oh, but come on, you're Asian, you should know this math," and it works. Like it's not like as direct in your face, but because it's still even in a joking way, like it's like not cool. So I think that's that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Have you?
You know what? This is another interesting thing because as much as I have experienced being othered when I was really young, I also have the other side of that coin where my background is very ambiguous. I always get asked, "Where are you from?" People cannot figure it out and they're so curious. And honestly, I don't mind. I get it at this point. People sometimes try to guess, like they'll be like, "Oh, I've heard such weird things. I've heard Icelandic. Like, oh, I swear you're from Iceland. You look like Bjork." Like I've heard really strange guesses. With that being said, I am mixed, right? I am half. So as much as I feel so connected to my Asian heritage and when I see Asian characters represented on screen and I feel seen, it's because I'm not white. I'm half white, but people forget that all the time, right? So that's the other side of this is I think, having one entire half of my family that is Asian and grew up a certain way, there's a lot of things that I didn't have to put up with. Like I have cousins who, I don't want to speak for them and for their experiences, but I know that they experienced stereotypes and some of the things that have been said to them are like, you must drive a white BMW or, one of them, their phone broke and a colleague of theirs said, "Why don't you just put it in some rice? I'm sure you have some on you." Like just stuff that you don't want to hear. And so on the flip side of being half Asian, I'm also half white. And I feel like a lot of the time I didn't experience a lot of that, which is it's very complicated. And that's something that I recognize and always have a really hard time with, especially with my nearest and dearest.
How do you feel when people take guesses of your background? Does it bother you?
I guess I'm just so I'm so used to it that it doesn't bother me. It only bothers me when it's usually a man and they are, trying to continue the conversation in a way that I'm not interested in. Otherwise, I think people are just genuinely curious.
Oh, okay. Because I've had conversations with friends, with other people, like in a group setting where that topic comes up and people ask, "Oh, what's your background," and so forth, right? But I've also had like unsolicited questions directed at me. Like one time I had a coworker who I didn't actually, like, we haven't spoken before. Like, we've spoken like briefly, but one time she like comes over, she's like, "Are you Korean?" I'm like, "No, why?" "Oh, I had this like Korean person on the call. I was hoping you could speak to them. It's like, no, well, no, I'm not Korean, so I'm sorry, I can't help you with that. And then I remember
my gosh.
I had one time in another elevator again. This was a older white guy. We're in the elevator together. I think we're going down to the main floor, and he just kind of turns to me and goes, "So are you Korean?" And I'm like, "No." He's like, "Oh, what's your background?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm Taiwanese." And he's like, "Oh, okay, cool. I thought you were Korean." And that was it. But it was so, I'm like, I don't think I would ever ask someone, like a stranger, something like that. If I would probably keep it to myself, but it was just so like blatantly open about it.
Yeah.
For this person.
Yeah. Like so entitled. You'd never go up to somebody like that and be like, "So are you German or English?"
It's just so odd. And then one time I was going on vacation, so I got in the elevator and I had my suitcase with me. And this guy goes, "Oh, going home to China?"
Oh my God.
And I'm like, "Man, bitch, I'm going to Iceland, okay?" I'm going on vacation. But it was just so it was like early in the morning. I was like, what is going on? But just I guess, is it entitlement? Is it the audacity? Is it just no self-awareness where I'm like, why you you don't just ask people, I don't know, these kinds of things. And of course, in the moment, it's like, sure, okay, you asked it, I answered, I move on with my life. But obviously, in this conversation, these kind of memories stick out.
Yeah.
Right? And there must be so many of these. If I think, if I sit down and really think about it, there must be a lot of these, right? And I know you must have a lot of those too, because I know something that, with representation that I have kind of wondered is because of your background being mixed. Like you said, you may feel a certain way to see something like Crazy Rich Asians come out.
Mm-hmm.
But is there any kind of does it go both ways? Is that even a thing for you? Do you feel any kind of way towards one background over the other? Or is that actually a not cool question to ask now that I'm asking it?
No, do you mean do I feel more of an affinity for one part of my heritage over another?
Yeah, kind of, yeah. Is that a thing?
It's not a thing. So, okay, well, here's the thing, right? Going back to the fact that I don't look entirely Asian. Some people are shocked when I tell them that I'm Asian. Passing as white, passing as the normative, I guess, standard has afforded me a lot of privilege. And what I mean by that is if I looked at movies and TV with that lens only, and I was I identify as white, so I see myself, that would definitely change my worldview. But I don't feel that way. I truly identify as both. I identify as somebody with an Asian background as well. With that being said, like I mentioned earlier, I also haven't had to deal with a lot of stigma in certain situations where I know for a fact my loved ones have. And that's so hard. It's so challenging for me. I almost feel I'm Asian. I don't feel like I can say that I'm Asian because I haven't had to go through a lot of those hard things that maybe some of my family members have had to. So it's complicated. But yeah, to answer your question, no, I don't feel more strongly one way or the other. I really I had, it's funny, my friends in high school and stuff, when I would make references to like my Asian heritage. Like when I would say like red bean desserts are my favorite, they'd be like, what? White people don't like red bean stuff. Like they think it's gross. And I'd have to remind them like, hey, I'm Asian too. You know, I grew up, Hakka was my first language actually. I can still, unfortunately, I don't speak it, but I understand it like as seamlessly as if it were English. So I can understand my grandparents. I can understand my family when they're talking shit. Sometimes they forget that. But yeah, I really identify as being Asian as well. And then in terms of like seeing mixed people on screen, because this is something you just jogged my memory with this. There are two mixed Asian actresses that people would always be like, oh my gosh, you look exactly like insert here. So the first one was Kristen Cruick from Smallville. Yeah. People would always be like, oh my God, you look exactly like that girl from Smallville. Or there was this other actress who was in Tokyo Drift and one of the Bruno Mars music videos.
Oh, okay.
And people, when that Bruno Mars music video came out, Just the Way You Are, I got so many messages from people being like, you look just like this girl. And actually, I had a friend group that just called me Tokyo. I'm not Japanese. But they called me Tokyo as a nickname for like a long time because they thought I looked like this mixed chick. And I'm like, there's lots of us out there and we don't all look like these two actresses who also don't look anything alike either. These two. So for me to just get compared to them. Yeah, that was funny growing up.
Yeah, I think that goes to show how rare that is. Because, going back to, movies and just like the media in general, right? It's like, I talked about how, especially for, I guess as a boy growing up, as a guy, and seeing the representation of what's available, at that time growing up in the 90s, in the early 2000s, again, it is just like martial arts and stuff. And again, as cool as it is, I just want to see some normal people doing regular day stuff where I can kind of like relate to, because I didn't grow up with any of that stuff. So I didn't get, like, I'm trying to think, and I'm gonna come back to you on this one too, is because there were so many years of Jackie Chan, which, super awesome movies, loved it, but, couldn't really relate in any way. Jet Li was a big one, I think, at one point. But it wasn't until I saw Harold and Kumar for the first time.
I was like, just going to mention this. Yeah.
Yeah, because for me, I was like, whoa, there's two Asian, like, male stars in a movie. And I'm like, I've never seen that before. And I mean, I'm trying to remember the movie as well, but I think one of the, I guess the tropes of that is, the guy, the Asian employee, the model employee who does whatever he's told, and it's his journey to go from that to like kind of being, I don't know if being the boss, but he was like the one kind of dictating how things should be instead of always being told what to do. And I think that was actually so refreshing to see. But I think that was something where, they made more movies out of that. But I think that was like kind of it for a while before seeing any more of that later on. And I think John Cho, I remember watching an interview with him where he talked about how, I remember he referenced himself as a actor of color. And I was like, oh, I never really thought about it that way. And that could be a bit of maybe a blind spot on my end or a bit of a bias where I was like, oh, I never really thought about myself as a person of color, because that wasn't really used. I think I always just saw like, oh, this person's Asian, this person's Asian American, Asian Canadian. I don't really remember anyone saying, oh, you're a person of color, until he said it in that interview.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it just provided more context. And I was listening to a podcast where he was on it, and he talked about that period in time where he goes, the way I might mess up the words, but he kind of described it like, yeah, we were all sold this idea that there could only be one. As in, for any movie, any show, there could only be one Asian person, and that's it. And so if that role was filled, you're done. And he was like, we were sold that myth, but it's like, we can just make more spots. We don't have to. But I think there's that, I don't know if we were fed this mentality or this mentality of scarcity, where it's like, oh, if there's one Asian person already there, then you know what? That's it. No more spots. Everyone, you can leave. You can go home. But I think that's something that people have to kind of recognize and kind of work on, because it kind of is true. Like I can't think of outside of Harold and Kumar, I have a hard time coming to mind any TV show or movie where you got like two Asian people who are also like in the main spotlight. Maybe there's like background characters, but
you mean growing up, like from our time, like 90s and early 2000s? Yeah.
Yeah, like there can only be one. So, but yeah, do you recall when you kind of started noticing maybe a shift in that trend of like noticing
what the standard was?
Yeah, how that shifted.
Yeah, I think it was a slow change and definitely recent. There's Kim's Convenience. There are shows like The Mindy Show, for example, where Mindy's the main character and she is a South Asian woman. I think slowly things started to change. And it is becoming more normal now. I'm excited for a day when it's like we don't have to get so excited about it, and it's like, oh, this movie is a predominantly Asian cast. It's just like it just is, like it's just a thing. But I definitely think it's something more recent, and I'm really excited for it because I honestly think that if I was young and I saw, the main character as being Asian, and not just seeing myself on screen, but I think if people from different backgrounds, if white people internalize the message that, oh, an Asian man can be the love interest instead of just the kung fu fighter, we'd have a much different society, right? This is why representation matters so much. It's not just that we, as Asian people, see ourselves on screen and see the potential for what we could be, what we could dream for. It's that other people see it too. And that is so important.
Yeah, I think that's, I think media portrayal of any kind really is very important. I do think social media has kind of started opening that up more. The mediums where, for us growing up was kind of just down to TV and movies. And I do think social media has changed that. But it's still like a slow change. And so, with things like what we see from entertainment and media, that's one thing, but I think I want to go into a little bit in terms of how that kind of plays out in our day-to-day lives. And that is also something where we talk about in, I think, like work, for example. I think maybe we should talk a little bit about representation at work. And I think one thing that we may agree on is that although I know that for, our workplace, there is definitely more conversations around, diversity and inclusion. One thing that I think is still a common topic is that there may be, I don't really see a lot of Asian representation in upper management.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something where it's almost like, at least from my point of view, again, so used to it until somebody points it out. I'm like, oh yeah, I don't see a lot of that in upper management. And it's kind of like, for me, it's hard to envision myself. If I was talking about like trying to climb that corporate ladder, for example, it's hard to kind of envision myself in there when it's like, oh, I don't see anyone else like me up there. So it's like, oh, maybe it's not for me.
Absolutely.
Right? Is that kind of what you see as well?
Yeah, thinking back to it, I don't think I've had a manager who is Asian, whether that's an Asian man or an Asian woman. This just jogs my memory. I remember reading that there was a Harvard Business Review article several years ago that found that Asian Americans were actually the least likely group to be promoted into management in the U.S., which is crazy because, at work, so we're shifting over to this conversation at work, Asians are always portrayed as smart, capable, like you said, like very good at numbers, that kind of thing. But they're not shown in positions of leadership. So to your point, like how can we see ourselves there? How can we see ourselves achieving that if there's no set example? So you're right, Danny. I think maybe that's the next part of this, right? Like it's changing in media and that's so great. But in the workplace, and maybe that's just our experience because we work in, we work for financial institutions. That's kind of like our experience. I'm sure a lot of people can relate, but maybe that's sort of like the next frontier is in our day-to-day lives. Like we want to see that representation of Asian people in positions of leadership.
Yeah, I think that would be, I don't know, this might be my way of like doing things, but it's like monkey see, monkey do, man. If I can't see it, it's hard for me to envision or replicate. And I think that's why representation matters so much in so many different aspects of our day-to-day lives. Like even in, let's say, I mean, I know you're not big on sports, but for me, I love basketball. But, let's be honest, it's kind of limited in terms of Asian people. But the rare times where there were big stars, I don't know if you know those people. Yao Ming was one. Jeremy Lin was one for a little bit. But it was such a cool thing to just like see them up there, just doing the things that, I love. And to see like, oh, wow, they can make it, which means it's a possibility. And I think that goes into not only just sports, like we
Politics.
said. Politics. Yeah, I can't name, can I name one Asian politician? No, I cannot.
Yeah, we can. We have to know this, Danny. The job that we worked in together was we had to know a lot of politicians, and I'm thinking of
one in mind?
Goodness. I do have one in mind. But the fact that it's like there's one, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Adrienne Clarkson, our Governor General of Canada. There you go.
Okay, yeah, okay.
That took way too long. But yeah, you're right. Like sports, politicians, just in our everyday facets of life, it's so important for us to see ourselves there and for others to see us there too.
Yeah, and I know that because, we consume so much media. Of course, media is going to be like, the biggest thing, right? So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. So what do you think in terms of what would make it better? Like, how can we, as individuals, I suppose, advance that to be more of a norm?
So I think one thing that we can do, and this is most relatable for us, is in corporate North America, in the workplace, we can hype each other up. I'm part of, I guess it's like an extracurricular group, you could call it, at work that is specifically for Asian employees to support each other. And we go over a lot of these topics about Asians in the workplace specifically. And I think it's important to attend these meetings, see the really great work that my Asian colleagues are doing across the organization, and just amplifying their voices. And whether that's casually, just in like a chat or an email with my teammates, just saying like, hey, so-and-so is working on this super cool initiative. Like they're doing such an awesome job. It's just really important for us to support each other and hype us up there. As for sports and other places where it's not as relatable for me, but let's say like Asian-owned businesses, for example, like fashion and beauty, I think putting your eyeballs and dollars where it counts goes a long way in supporting that, right? So like showing that like you support Asian athletes or you support Asian-owned businesses, like vote with your dollar and vote with your, like where you're spending your time with what you're watching.
Yeah, I think that's really good points. And I think there's really good things to keep in mind. I think for, myself, for you, listeners, I definitely think that there are things that, we can all do to help everyone out. And I think it's definitely something where just even talking about it here on a podcast, I know we both know that there are other podcasts that talk about these kinds of topics. And I think it's important to kind of just keep that conversation going. I think that that's important to have. Otherwise, I think a lot of times it's if we don't talk about it and people don't know about it, then that's when these things kind of keep going. So I think it is important to talk about how to help. And, this is not to kind of get away from it, but I did remember this one time and in terms of talking about like dealing with, as an Asian person and kind of just dealing with some of the things that are unfortunate. Of course we went through, or you can argue we're still in COVID. And obviously there was a lot of like Asian hate stories that happened. Yeah. So, like those are like really unfortunate, really frustrating, and, makes me angry to hear about just the amount of targeted attacks towards Asian people, especially elderly Asian people who dealt with that. But like my own personal thing was back when SARS was still a thing, or back when SARS was a thing. And I remember going to the movies with a couple of my friends. We walked into the theater and there was these like, there's like high school time, I think, or, late high school time. And there's a bunch of like guys in the front, non-Asian people. And of course, and then as soon as we walked in, a couple of them just like started coughing. And then they're just like yelling out like SARS. And
oh my God.
and we went to the back, we sat down, and I remember just sitting there. Like, it took a while, but I was fuming, sitting in my chair, just like, I just can't believe how racist that random people are towards people who like had nothing to do with them.
Yeah.
But like, that's a thing, and that's something where I'm only telling it to you now, so people will hear it. But how many of these things happen all the time, every day, for people?
Every day, yeah.
Right? Like, I'm sure it happens so much, and I'm sure if I were to ask any of my friends who are Asian, I was like, "Hey, give me an example," I'm sure there'd be no problem. But these are the kind of things too, where I'm like, as much as representation is important, we kind of have to speak up and speak out when things happen to us.
Yeah, I'm so sorry you experienced that. And thank you for sharing. And to your point, with COVID, the instances of anti-Asian hate and attacks are on the rise. So I agree with you. We need to keep the conversation going. As much as a lot of change has happened, there's still a long way to go. So yeah, I agree. Let's keep talking about it.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely. We'll definitely get the conversation going. However, I think today that might be it. I'm trying to
wrap it up.
Want to wrap it up?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Danny.
Thanks, Jocelyn. So I think that's it for today. I guess want to name our socials again, please, if you don't mind.
Yeah, you can follow us on Instagram at Why Can't We Podcast. And yeah, subscribe. If you like it, please subscribe. That helps us out a lot. And we'll talk to you next time.
All right. Thank you. Until next time.
Bye.
Bye.